So let's get going. I'm assuming you hear me all okay, and if not, please shout or at least say something in the chat. I'm Erik Schön. Nice to be here to talk about doctrine or dogma and about challenging your assumptions in a friendly way, because this is so important. Yeah, let's go. If you have questions or comments or anything, just let me know in the chat, or turn on your camera and audio and shout it all out. It's much more fun if we have an interactive session than if it's just me talking. So use the chat or use the audio and video and come up with questions or comments, so we have a bit of a conversation here. Yeah, let's get right into it. Who are these? You recognize these distinguished gentlemen? Boyd, yeah, that's the gentleman on the left. Wardley, that's the gentleman on the right. He doesn't have a funny wig in this picture, yeah, that's the way he normally looks. Great, so why do I have them here? Well, obviously, there are pretty important characters when it comes to doing it, and then they had some wisdom from doing it. So I think the important thing is about Boyd being a strategist. He talked about always challenging your assumptions, and if not doing that, you would get your doctrine, I mean your principles for operations, to become a dogma forever after. Dogma in the sense that something constant that you cannot change. So he was very much into challenges. And the same thing with Simon. He even has a doctrine which is challenge your assumptions. So it's a bit of a meta or recursive thing here. But I think that's the theme for this whole session, the importance of challenging your assumptions, the ones that are explicit or the ones that are implicit. And the way of using Wordley maps to get your assumptions to become explicit is just wonderful. So let's keep this in mind, challenging your assumptions in a friendly way. That's also important. Believe people have a positive intent and do the challenges in a friendly way in order to improve. What's this? Yeah, friendly and impersonal. Friendly and personal, if you know the people. Can you be friendly and impersonal? Good question, Manish, on the chat. Anyway, I'm trying. Yeah, a big digital wave. Thanks, Andreas. It's a very big wave. It's not a tsunami. Many people think it's a tsunami, but it's actually a freak wave, and originally painted by Hokusai in the early 19th century. And you see the Mount Fuji at the back. So illustrating the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity of the world already in the 19th century. What has happened recently is this digital thing where we have bits that travel at least 1,000 times faster than atoms, leading to an even bigger thing in this change that we live in. Even more transformative things going on. So a crucially important question to ask in such a world is the following. And let's see if I can put that onto the screen. Hello. There we go. Yeah, so whether the rate of change will never be slower than today, being in a digital world, how can we be certain to succeed? This has been a question that strategists and other people have been thinking about for at least 2,500 years. And the answer is, of course, the following. Sorry, we have a bit of a commercial break here. Technical timeout, won't take long, just a few seconds. Bear with me. So just to tell you who I am, I'm with Erlang Solutions. We're a bunch of people that do cool things when it comes to Erlang and Elixir, the open source programming languages. We work with customers like MasterCard, Cisco, Klarna, Ericsson, startups, scale-ups, and all kinds of companies. So yeah, that's who I'm with. And I'm a team player. This is the team that I play with, football or soccer for people in America. Executive strategist, engineer, team player, writer recently. As Manish said, I wrote this thing called The Art of Strategy, which is about strategy and how to be certain to succeed. I'm ex-Ericsson, ex-NetEnt, ex-FramFab, currently with Erlang Solutions, as I said. And I was with something called the Steve Denning Learning Consortium, Microsoft, Spotify, Riot Games, and a few others who were sharing and learning on culture and ways of working and how to lead change, basically. So that's me. So let's get back to the program. In a world where the rate of change will never be slower than today, how can we be certain to succeed? Yeah, the cliffhanger. Well, strategy, duh. That's why we're all here, and that's why we love Wardley mapping, because that's a way of visualizing strategy. And I think this quote from Simon is pretty neat. The art of manipulating or shaping an environment to gain a desirable outcome. So how can we turn the odds in our favor a bit? That's what strategy is all about. And if you were in the introductory session by Simon, you saw the strategy circle. The purpose, landscape, climate, doctrine, and leadership, the 5 factors going back all the way to Sun Tzu, 2,500 years ago. I think purpose is your why. Landscape, your terrain, the evolution of the climatic patterns, and then doctrine, which is the sort of ways of operating that are non-context specific, and then leadership, the gameplays, your choices, how to make yourself more certain to succeed. And of course, all of this is covered in the outer circle, the Boydian OODA loop, which is not really a loop, where you sort of observe your landscape and your climate. You orient yourself to see where things are heading, and you use various analytic and synthetic methods to do that. It's based on your genetic heritage, your social context. So that's really shaping your perception of the world and how things are going. And then you decide and act, looping around this thing, which is not really a loop. Yeah. I was just checking if there were some questions. Apparently not. So I continue. As I said, please jump in with questions or comments at any time, either on the chat or grab the microphone and grab the screen. So let's move on and zoom in. And zoom in. I'm trying to move here. Why can't I move? Like that. Let's zoom in on doctrine. Why, you may ask? Well, it goes all the way back to Sun Tzu. You should always start by assessing and preparing. And there are a number of questions in the art of war, or the art of strategy, as I think it should be called. And one of them is, who carries out doctrine more skillfully? And after answering all these questions, including who carries out doctrine more skillfully, that will show you who will be certain to succeed or not. That's why doctrine is important. And what is it? Well, Simon talked about it in the introductory session. It's those principles or universally useful patterns, as Boyd would prefer to call it, those that can be applied irrespective of your context, your landscape, or your climate. They are sort of universal. Please note that a doctrine is never completely right. It's just proven to be useful and consistently useful for the time being. So it's like all your scientific laws. There's always potential for refinement and a betterment and an improvement, and that's why it's so important to challenge your doctrine in a friendly way. So there will always exist better doctrine in the future, and it's up to us as practitioners to come up with a better doctrine and not just accept what Simon has found over the years, which is a fantastic starting point. But we all have different perspective and experiences, and I think that's super important that we build upon that and stand on the shoulders of giants, be it Simon, John Boyd, or Sun Tzu, to sort of refine and improve the doctrine. Okay, how about an example or a few examples? Very abstract definition here. Let's move on. So a few examples from Simon. Use a common language. That's an example of Wordless Doctrine, and it's about communication. In development, focus on user needs. That's a very good principle or sort of law that's often forgotten in product development. Know the details in operations. I mean, sometimes we're very high level and we're not aware of what's going on. And then lean, that's sometimes called going to the gemba, going to where the action is to see for yourself what is really going on, which is of course hard in knowledge work because a lot of the work is not going on in the shop floor, in the factory, but in people's heads or in the cloud where you can't really see it. So that's why visualization is so important. Learning, bias towards data. Data is good, better than opinions, and that's also a good starting point. Moving fast when it comes to leading and leadership. That goes back all the way to Sun Tzu. He was a big proponent of moving with swiftness and speed because wars, I mean, you want to avoid them in the first place through alliances and whatnot. But if you have to, you should make them swift because it's a horror. Structure-wise, how do we structure organizations, for instance? Well, small teams is a good thing. That's a good principle or universally applicable and useful pattern. So I'm going to check those questions here. Andreas, yeah, what I learned about your observations of your landscape and climate depends on your beliefs too. We all tend to focus on certain types of data while ignoring other sets. How can we balance our blind spots from your perspective from choosing the right doctrine? Very good point. Beliefs are a part of the orientation. Well, orientation shapes your observation, and your belief system is part of that, and your assumptions, explicit or implicit, are also part of your orientation system, and you do various kinds of analysis and synthesis in the orientation phase. My biggest insight over the past 10-20 years is that if you have a team doing this, a diverse team, people with different backgrounds, different ages, different sexes, different different nationalities and whatnot, having a team working together, providing different perspectives in a safe environment is really, really a good help. Diversity and inclusion in a safe environment where everyone is heard and seen. That's a big recommendation from my side. And maybe that's something that should be more explicit in the doctrines that we use in companies moving forward. I hope that answers your question, or at least triggers new thoughts, Andreas. Keep the questions and comments coming, by the way. Sustainability as a doctrine. Yeah, that could be a doctrine. Definitely, I think. I have to think about it a bit more. I think that could be something universally applicable, irrespective of landscape and context, potentially. I have to think about that one. It's a good question. Let's move on. Yeah, another old gentleman, Sun Tzu, or maybe not. He's a very mysterious character. He also talks about capabilities. So in the beginning of the art of war or the art of strategy, Sun Tzu talks about, assessing and preparing, and not only about doctrine. So what are your capabilities? What capabilities do you have at hand in your team or as an individual or as an organization? And how does the other stakeholders, where are they when it comes to capabilities, doctrine, and so on? So this is important, and this is eternal wisdom. And a capability is really the ability to fulfill a user need, or the ability or capability or ability sort of for a component to fulfill the needs of another component in a value chain or a Wardley map. So let's take a look at a value chain, which is really a dependency of needs showing capabilities. So let's take a look at a value chain. So this is the typical example that Simon often uses of a value chain, where you have a customer here as the anchor, and the customer needs online. You want your online service here. And you want image manipulation, photo storage, and print. And that's what you need as a customer. Then printing needs a website, and online photo storage needs a website as well. And the website needs some kind of customer resource management. It needs a platform, and platform and customer relationship management needs compute, which needs data center and power. So from visible needs down to more invisible needs. That's your value chain, which is really dependency of needs and a visualization of your capabilities. So let's look at another example of visualization of capabilities. Let's look at the system anatomy, which is really how to show dependencies about capabilities in the product, which is very similar to a value chain. So let's look at a simple example of a travel card reader in a bus. So similarly, as in your classical value chain, you have sort of needs here at the top, or capabilities at the top, and then you can follow the graph going downwards. You can sell your tickets, you can show balance, you can register travel, and you need a display, you need to read the radio frequency identity, you check balance, deduct, manage, check validity, and you go all the way down to power supply. And this is something that's been in use since the early 90s for doing large telecom products. So it shows the dependencies of your capabilities, and this is very, very powerful visualization used by, for example, companies like Ericsson, where I came into contact with it for the first time. So that's one way of visualizing your capabilities in one of those system anatomies. So let's see if we can take this to the next level. We have something called an anatomy of excellent development. So rather than showing the dependency among capabilities in a product that we saw on the previous illustration, we can see how you can visualize the dependencies among capabilities in product development, or in a system for product development. So let's see how we can do this. So at the top, we're looking to succeed, bring joy, customers, employees, and even owners, all your stakeholders, by delivering state-of-the-art software systems or a state-of-the-art product. And the dependencies here, you need to do the right things, effectiveness, choices, and you need to do things right, which is more on the efficiency side. And to do things right, you need to validate your solutions and to, check that they're reasonable for society, that they're viable business sense with your business model. Feasible technology-wise, is technology there so you can realize them? Are they valuable and usable for your customers? Easy to forget, customer needs. And moving along this dependency graph, you need to know what your vision is so you can move towards your next thing. And then you need to know your users and your user needs. This is sort of the left-hand side on how to do things right, which is on the left, obviously. On the right-hand side is more on the efficiency side of things. We want to do more. We want to do things faster. We want to do things better. Quality, velocity, throughput. We want feedback loops. That's learning, right? Learning and improvements. And in order to do, or rather as a prerequisite for doing this, we need collaboration inside and across teams, not only development teams, cross-functional development teams, but leadership teams across the organization. And it all starts with me and you respecting each other and our colleagues. So that's another way of visualizing capabilities in a dependency graph, which looks almost like a value chain. But this was developed also in Ericsson, starting from this system anatomy or product anatomy, and then applied in a different context. Instead of building world-class products, how do we build world-class organizations? What are the ingredients or capabilities needed to do that? So let's see if there are some questions here. What about develop the people and competence that develop the solutions, tech changes, and real investment in the teams and people? Yeah, I'm thinking if that is related to the anatomy of excellent development, I would assume it is, and if so, definitely that's part of it, and I guess you could argue it's part of the learning and improvements, having the short, fast feedback loops for learning and in that sense developing people and teams, both about ways of working and tech changes. So definitely important. I would say it's part of the short, fast feedback loops, not only for the quick learning, but also long-term learning, strategic learning. System constraints, theory constraints. System and products delivered capabilities are valuable, which are valuable for the customer. Arno, that's a great, let's see, thinking of theory of constraints. System is only as strong as the weakest link. Yeah, I agree on that. I'm a big fan of Don Reinertsen's work on flow, and I think that work builds upon and extends upon the theory of constraints and uses thinking from other domains, like telecom, on how to handle flows of packets in telecom and how to handle flows in product development or software development. So theory of constraints is important, but I think the flow thinking and we can find a lot of inspiration for doctrine in Don Reinertsen's work as well. But of course, theory of constraints is also a great source of inspiration for doctrine. Capabilities are not the product. Products are delivered capabilities which are valuable to the customer. Yes, exactly. But if you see capabilities as abstracts, you can have capabilities in your product, but you can also have capabilities in your system for developing products. Then those capabilities are slightly different. But if you see a capability as an ability or an ability to do something, then that capability could exist in your product as well as in your product development system. I hope that makes sense. Otherwise, I'm happy to continue the discussion separately. But think about a more generalized definition of capabilities as sort of not only a product component, but something that can provide a service also in product development or software development. Okay, well, let's move on. Yes, so this is a way of visualizing doctrine. So this is a specific doctrine that was developed based on experiences from Ericsson and NetEnt and Erlang Solutions. Okay, another way to visualize capabilities, another example which I like very much, and Mark Berger was talking about that in a parallel session to this one that I will watch later on with great interest. Maturity mapping. How can you make context-specific mapping or a model of your teams and organizations, what capabilities they have based on Wardley mapping? This is very, very interesting. So these are not universal principles or universal ways of working, rules or laws. These are context specific. So if we look at this graph, which is a Wardley map, you have the evolution as your horizontal axis and visibility as your vertical axis. And at the top, in this specific case, it's about finding the right home. They're building a product, a software product for finding the right home. And the team that is doing that needs to find out how to do that in the best possible way. And they start mapping out what they need. So building the thing right, in order for this team to build a software solution for finding the right home, they need to build the server side and the client side. And they need to test. And they need to test not only the client side, but also the server side. And they need to collaborate with the database team. So in this case, for this team, they've never done client-side tests, so this is novel to them. Connection with the database team, that is something that they're starting to get to hang out, and same thing with the client-side build. They're pretty good at doing server-side testing, and they're pretty good at doing server-side build, and that's why they place those components where they place them. So this is a great way of sort of visualizing where you're at as a team, your capabilities for building a product. And you can also use it to check your current doctrine if you have sort of come up with concrete examples of your more abstract principles or rules or laws that it sort of fits with your overall doctrine as a company. But it can also show you that maybe you have some holes in your doctrine. Maybe there are new practices coming up that you're not aware of that you need to complement your existing doctrine with. And maybe this is actually, I hope, more of an explanation to Arno about capabilities, how you can see capabilities as a team or as an organization through this example. Other questions or comments on visualization of capabilities? If not, we move on. Yeah, I forgot to say that this is a specific implementation of Doctrine. You have concrete examples of how you make your Doctrine happen. Yes, so speaking of Doctrine, let's get back to Doctrine. Your universal useful patterns that a user can apply irrespective of context, landscape, and climate. And let's get back to Wardley's Doctrine. So Simon has generously collected all his wisdom that he had over the past 20 years in this magnificent magical chart with communication doctrine, development doctrine, operation doctrine, structure, learning, and leadership. So we all have it here. Let's add even some more order than just the categories. So Simon and Steve Perkis divided this into phases. So phase 1 is stop self-harm. Just try to get a little bit better than your competitors using these aspects of Doctrine. Phase 2 is becoming more context aware, looking out, orientating yourself in the world. Phase 3, how can you get better for less, get better outcomes with less effort. And then phase 4 is sort of the nirvana of continuously evolving and learning and improving and not getting static. So stop self-harm, becoming more context aware, get better for less, and continuously evolving. These are the steps or the phases that you should assess and prepare, or rather, based on your assessment, do your preparations of Doctrine. And I think this is really, really interesting. So when you assess yourself or your competitor, and it looks like this, you see, red is warning, yellow is weak, gray is unknown, blue is pretty good. And if your assessment looks rather red, yellow, this happens to be a bank. I'm not going to mention the name. You can ask Simon if he's willing to share it. But if it looks like this, you want to do something. You want to prepare. You want to get better at Doctrine. And by preparing, you will hopefully look more like this, which is a very well-known web engineering giant. I won't mention the name, but you can probably ask Simon and he would be willing to share over a cup of tea. So these are the ways of, using the Wardley Doctrine. I won't go into all the details because there's a lot of wisdom here. I mean, basically, Simon has collected 20 years of experience in this sheet, and by adding the phases, we can see which order we should do things. We rather not, go into structural things before stopping self-harm. So I think this is pretty important. And finally, we're coming to the challenging assumptions regarding Doctrine. So how can we do this? Let's try an experiment and see how this plays out. Are you ready for an experiment? I'm looking at the chat here. Before going into the experiment. Rudiger, weakest link is different in different companies. Just because it improved throughput or value in organization A doesn't mean it will work in a similar fashion in org B. Yeah. I think you can have different ways of implementing the principles. So if you think of principles and like what and why, the hows can be different in different companies. And that would be my answer to that observation, which I think is a very relevant one. Carl, this will be very useful for what we're trying to do with the transformation process. Thanks. Yeah, happy to help. Arno, in case we needed capabilities for the context, I see it very often the teams build the wrong thing right because they have that capability. Unfortunately, no customer had the need. Yeah, I've seen that many, many times as well. So you always need to go back to the customer need. That needs to be on your map. And that's fundamental in Simon's doctrine. And that's also fundamental in the maturity mapping that Mark is talking about. And also this anatomy of excellent development. It's so easy to forget the customer and their needs. Yeah, great. So let's move into the experiment. Let's turn Wordless Doctrine into a value chain. Are you ready? So let's say we're an executive leadership team of an unknown organization. What do we want? We want certain success together with our organization's stakeholders, our employees, our customers, our owners. I think those are the primary stakeholders. So coming back to Arno, your comment, I mean, of course, the customers are important, but it's also important to remember your employees and your owners. So certain success, that's what we want. Let's look at one part of Wordless Doctrine. Let's look at the communication part. Successful communication is something we want. And be transparent is a good thing. A bias towards the open, as Simon puts it. That's an essential component or prerequisite for successful communication. We talk about challenging assumptions. That's the whole theme of this session. Speak up and question, dare to challenge in a friendly way. That's an important part of being transparent, or rather a prerequisite. We talk about focusing on high situational awareness, understanding what's being considered, understanding your landscape, understanding the climatic pattern. For example, using something like a map or a common language. So do you speak the same language in your organization? Because this is a prerequisite for collaboration and cooperation. And maps are wonderful for this purpose, of course. So a Wordly map is an example or an instantiation of using a common language. Any questions or comments on this? Can you guess what's next? Are you ready for it? So we have turned the Wordly Doctrine, or parts of the Wordly Doctrine, into a value chain. Let's see if we can turn it into a Wordly map. Evolution on the horizontal axis, value chain on the vertical axis. This should be familiar. And let's see what we have here on the horizontal axis. I would say, let's try something. It's an experiment, right? So over here, novel. This is new to us as an organization. Next phase is we are learning it. Third phase, we are doing it. And fourth phase, we can teach it to others. We're both good at doing it. We're in fact so good that we feel confident enough to teach it to others. So these are the different areas that we're now going to put the value chain for the Wordly Doctrine of communication into. So we're executive leadership team of the organization. We want certain success together with our stakeholders. And Successful communication is, yeah, in this case, we're learning it. We're pretty good. We're almost doing it. We're learning it. Transparent, yeah, we're learning it. Sort of slightly worse than successful communication, but we can debate that in our team to see where to put it. Challenge assumptions, speak up and question. This is new. We're a very humble organization, and we're not so fond of conflicts. I think this holds for Swedes and people in England. We're not so good at challenging assumptions. I think many of my German friends are very good at this. So that's why diversity is good. Focus on high situational awareness. Same thing here, we're learning it. And common language, we're doing it. So maybe they in this case have started using maps in the organization. So Rüdiger and Carl, yeah, challenge assumption location, yeah. And the cool thing here, this is just an example that I made up for the purpose of this experiment to see how it would play out. I never tried this before, and I love the way of playing around with things. So this is very much inspired by Simon's work with Doctrine, of course, and the work on maturity mapping by Mark Bergauer and McDermott and McMahon that I first learned about a couple of years back. And then, of course, this anatomy of excellent development. So how can you as an organization be world-class at what you're doing? You need to reflect on the way you do things and not get bogged down into all the details with your tools and your practices. You need to think about principles and doctrine in this way. I think it's super important. So we're nearing the end of the session. Simon, what do you say? Makes me smile. Order the faces. Yeah, I think I got the inspiration. There must be some mapping hiding in the doctrine somewhere. And this is just the first attempt. And let's see if it's useful. If it's useful, well, then it will work out. If it's not, then it will not be used, right? I'm going to wrap up. I'm not sure how long we'll keep the room. So summary, doctrine, useful, universal useful patterns that you can apply irrespective of context, landscape, or climate. How can we be certain to succeed? Strategy, preferably using Wordley maps, right? Always start with assessing and preparing. Doctrine and capabilities. Don't go into gameplays. Start with this. Visualize your capabilities and doctrine. Super important. Challenge your assumptions. Dare to do it in a friendly way. Challenge even doctrine. Because, they are useful currently, and who knows what the next evolution of doctrine will be. And of course, by all means, try to experiment, see how this value chaining and Wordley mapping of doctrine works for you. If it's useful, then by all means use it and share it. That's all. Thank you. And thanks, Manish, Björn, Leslie, and everyone else for coming to the session. It's been a pleasure, and thanks Holger and John for arranging, and thanks Simon for giving us Wordley mapping and Wordley maps. And before moving into Q&A, maybe we have a few minutes for Q&A. I have some references here. That you have, of course, the Wordley mapping awesome list, some articles on anatomy of excellent development, McDermott's first blog on maturity mapping, Simon's introduction, presentations, books, and videos that I found very inspiring over the years, both for Wordley mapping in general and for challenging doctrine. The slides will, of course, be available, and it's all what's it called, Creative Commons. Since Simon's work is Creative Commons, this is Creative Commons. There will be PDF versions of the slides. There might be a blog post also where I take my speaker's notes and turn it into a blog. So of course the slides will be available. And now I'll open up for Q&A.